In the meantime, both the West and Russia accuse one another of using a combination of covert and overt antiques to trick Ukraine towards their own camps. On the Russian part, Moscow has stationed its troops in Crimea and frozen the $15 billion aid package at the time described by President Putin as a neighborly gesture to help the citizens of Ukraine. I'm joined by V.Chizhov, Russia's ambassador to the EU. Now, Your Excellency, what is going on at two airports in Crimea where reportedly new troops are being stationed?
Well, there are no troops whatsoever, no Russian troops at least. The international airport of Simferopol is functioning normally. The military airport of Belbek is probably also functioning normally.
But there are more troops stationed there.
No. There are no Russian troops stationed anywhere at the airports.
No armed men installed there?
Some civilians claiming to be representing groups of self-defense of the Crimea arrived at the Simferopol airport overnight, but they retreated and nothing has happened.
Why do they think they have to defend the airport?
Well, they've been seeing what was happening in Kiev and elsewhere. They've been hearing threats that so-called friendship trains are loaded with armed supporters of the Kiev Maidan were on their way to the Crimea. Naturally, the local population is worried.
The atmosphere has become more and more tense with Mr. Kerry, the US Secretary of State, asking Russia not to intervene, not to interfere, and not to occupy.
Well, the United States, being in the tradition of interfering in other countries and sending troops overseas, may be acting according to their own mentality, I would say. But this is not a case of Russian interference. Actually, many people in Russia are asking questions. Why is the Russian government keeping such a low profile?
Why?
Because we understand how tense the situation is and how volatile it can become.
Do you feel threatened?
We are certainly looking after our national interests in Ukraine. There are many Russian citizens residing permanently in this brotherly country, and we care about all those Russians that have been living in Ukraine. Well, we were parts of the same country for centuries, and the usual traditional reference to Kiev is the mother of all Russian cities. So Kievan Rus is the birthplace of modern Russia. Naturally, we have millions upon millions ties between families and individuals. We have economic interests. There are many Russian investments in Ukrainian economy. And yes, we have a military presence in the Crimea in the form of the Black Sea Fleet, which has been there since the 18th century.
What would you do if you feel that your interests are really threatened?
Well, I wouldn't want to speculate, but of course we're closely watching the developments.
The Ukrainian government, the leaders have said that your act of installing troops in Crimea is, I quote, invasion and occupation by Russia.
Well, first of all, these allegations are baseless. Secondly, I think they should be focusing more on the immediate economic problems of Ukraine, rather than trying to shift the focus of everybody's attention to the Crimea.
What they see is a repeat performance of Georgia of 2008. You know, they watch your moves and they see similarities between the two.
Well, the events of 2008 if you mean the Georgian aggression against South Ossetia, I hope it doesn't come to that.
This is not how they see it. They see it as Russian aggression against Georgia.
Well, everybody is free to have one's opinion over, but there are certain realities and certain facts that should not be distorted.
How do you see the reality of the situation now in Ukraine?
Well, I see that as a result of certain actions by armed groups, the legitimate democratically elected president had to leave Kiev. The opposition, having signed on the 21st of February an agreement with President Yanukovych, which was witnessed by 3 EU foreign ministers, did not fulfill any of its own obligations. The armed groups did not disarm. The administrative buildings were not vacated. The subsequent events in the parliament and approval of an interim government by a claim in the street, which is hardly compatible with what you and I would regard as European democratic values.
But these are people, and that's the parliament. This is democracy.
Well, when people are intimidated by armed groups, and we still see that. Only yesterday there were scenes in various parts of Ukraine with local authorities and even prosecutors beaten up by armed representatives of ultra-nationalist and neo-Nazi minded people. That is, of course, that has nothing to do with democracy. Democracy means elections. Elections that did take place in Ukraine. And actually, those who today try to portray the current situation as transition from a dictatorship to democracy, those same people and same countries, same governments, they acknowledged that presidential elections in Ukraine in 2010 were democratic, free and fair, and President Yanukovych was recognized as a democratically elected leader. And the EU was actually planning to sign an association agreement with him, nobody else.
To me, it's simpler than that. You see, it's a transition from one form of a government to another by the parliament. I mean, the parliament's role here is very important, and these are elected people by the people of Ukraine.
These are indeed elected people. About a third of the members do not participate. And those that are, some are acknowledging that they have been threatened and their families threatened. Unless they vote, they would suffer. There were many promises of an inclusive government, of a government of national unity. What we see today as the so-called interim government does not even vaguely remind that of those promises. There are no representatives from the eastern part of the country, from the southern part of the country, and only a limited number of political factions are represented.
How do you see the role of the West, the EU and America in all that?
Well, we've been witnessing this political support. I'm not talking about material support in the form of croissant and other things distributed by Western officials in the Maidan, but political support for the opposition. So my conclusion is that both the European Union and the United States did not escape the temptation of siding with one side.
So how are you planning to negotiate a resolution, a solution to the crisis with the West and with the international community?
Well, a solution to the crisis cannot be found through negotiation between Russia and the West. It's not for us, it's not for the West to take decisions for the Ukrainian people. I'm sure the Ukrainians are in a position to find their own way out. Of course, they are facing huge difficulties in the economic area. The coffers seem to be empty, and I wouldn't doubt that. Russia is prepared to cooperate with the IMF, with the European Union and other potential players on the economic scene to see what kind of economic support can be provided to Ukraine.
Your Excellency, if the worst comes to the worst, would you be prepared to take military action against Ukraine?
I don't want to speculate about the worst. I'm hoping for the better. I'm a born optimist.
Your Excellency, thank you very much.
Thank you.